So let me start again. The time is 7:04. We have a quorum on the calls. Brian Host, Chair Michael Dick, Vice Chair Francine Lyons, Secretary, and Ralph Dormitzer, Associate Member, also from the town of Cohasset, Michelle Leary. We've also got, looks like Susan Franklin dialing in. Let me just bring her into the meeting. She's been promoted to panelist. And we also have online Mark Cameron, who will be listening in, but certainly we can promote to panelist if he so desires. And it looks like Susan's coming in. Hi, Susan. We've got you present, but no video or sound just yet. Well, while she goes ahead and does that, first of all, everybody, welcome to the fiscal 24 annual town meeting capital budget planning process. Not sure this evening needs to be a long meeting, but we need to get started on this process. So I think today is mostly organizational. Michelle was kind enough to upload to the OneDrive last week the capital budget requests that we have to date. It looks like, we have requests from schools, DPW, IT, police, and fire. Doesn't look like we have anything yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but it doesn't look like we have anything from Harbor, Rec, or Library. Is that accurate?
So we're not going to receive anything from Rec or Library this year.
Okay.
Harbor, we do have something in there where it's still unclear. We're working with the engineer to know if it's going to be this year or next year that we're going to be requesting it.
Okay, so we may have a Harbor request, but there's not one in the system yet.
Correct.
Okay, and then in addition to that, I think there's quite a bit of discussion as to whether or not town hall will be coming this spring, and there's also some discussion about possible request for a feasibility study for the school, which would be a very sizable number. We're talking about something in the neighborhood of about $2 million to do a feasibility study. So I think that's the range of items that that we have in front of us. Once again, we're going to have a funnel problem. Not all this is going to fit into our funding. Schools are in front of us with requests totaling $1.5 million. DPW is looking for an increase in funding for roads to the tune of $1 million. Historically, we've been funding that. I want to say for somewhere around 300,000, if I'm not mistaken. So it's it's more than a 3x increase. So I think there's going to be, it's a big request, and there's going to be a lot of work around that. The other DPW requests are, more normal. IT has another big slug of spending requested at 500,000, and then police and fire are pretty straightforward. So, we've got some pretty big stuff that's going to require. We've got a few chunky items that are going to require a real deep dive, I guess is what I would say, for everyone to get their heads around these, or at least for me to get my heads around them. So, the goal tonight was really to get these assigned to people from a liaison perspective, and just get out to the departments and get working. We can spend a few minutes if anyone wants to actually sort of discuss any of these requests briefly, just in terms of flagging issues or concerns that you may have. If that's helpful, we can do it. If people don't want to do that, we can just move right into liaison assignments. I'd be curious what people would prefer. Michelle, you can get your hand up.
Yep. So I just want to highlight one thing. So uploaded in that drive is also the 10-year capital plan. Yep. And you will see some variations between the requests that were submitted and the amounts in the 10-year capital plan. And that is simply because the quotes that were received at the time that the request was submitted has changed, and facilities has updated that. I put it in the 10-year capital plan, but because I receive a lot of these requests via PDF, I'm not able to change them. So we have to go back to the individual departments and ask them to change the values. That mostly affects schools at this point in time. But other than that, everything else should be.
Okay, so so the most recent numbers are in the 10-year capital plan, is that correct, and not in the requests?
In some instances, yes.
Okay, all right. So as we work through these, we're just gonna have to make sure we clarify with the departments. And I didn't see any requests from facilities independent of schools. Did I miss that, or are they just not there yet?
There should be there.
Did anyone else go through what's on the OneDrive? Did anyone see facilities? I just, maybe I
Yeah,
just.
they have 910,000, if I read it correctly, 910,000.
Okay, that's a big item for me to miss.
Yeah.
I've been unable to get into the OneDrive. I just tried it again. It's just loading with a spinning circle.
Okay.
Brian, let me jump in and say something. Just the first question in my mind is, what kind of money do we have, given the fact that I'm looking at a total of $7,673,000, right?
Yeah.
Up, that's $5 million up from last year's spending, something like that. So it's really an extraordinary number.
Yeah.
The real question is, what have we got? What is realistic here?
I think the realistic assumption is that we've got about $2 million to spend.
Okay, so there's a huge, huge gap here.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Massive. Biggest we've ever seen.
Yep. So,
Okay.
it almost is worth passing out to people the idea that somehow there are going to be some extraordinary changes in this thing if in fact we're going to meet 2 million. I think it's almost like this is the kind of thing you send back. You just don't take it and say, okay, we're going to work each one of these items. You have to almost say, okay, got to send them back, right?
Yeah, I mean, we may work each one of these items, but people need to understand 2/3 of them are not happening this year. So I guess maybe that might be action item 1. Maybe I need to send out an email to the departments and just let people know what the funnel looks like, and the fact that, that there will not be $7 million worth of spend this year. How do people feel about that? I mean, it's sort of taking your point, Ralph, and just sending the message right back out immediately.
I agree. But before we begin, I just want to welcome Francine back. It's great to have you back, Francine.
Thank
We
you.
missed you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
I feel that this is dead on arrival, and that we need to ask Chris Senior to give us more money immediately to rework his operating budget, to provide more funds here. And if he says, no, I can't, then we are well within our rights to say to everybody who requested it, we have 2 million to spend and we have 7.6 million in requests. We're sending your requests back for retraction or reduction, and not even get into it. But as long as it's early in the game here, I feel should be sending this back as untenable.
I think there are 3, I mean, Ralph's point is taken, but there are at least 2 big items here that I think are driving that. One, and Michelle, you mentioned the Harbor Master, that there's $1 million in there just for Harbor Master, and that may not happen this year. That's part of the $7.6 million. And then the schools, they've got the study in there for $2 million. So that's another couple $1 million. That, isn't something they presented to us, but it's in the numbers. So to Michelle's point, I think there's a little bit of a mismatch in what's in the 10-year plan versus what they're actually asking for, or that's been uploaded to the shared drive anyway.
So again, we send this back and ask all departments to send us updated requests and not ask us to go into the 10-year plan and interpret what we see there. I feel we should have very clear requests in front of us from each department with explanations and rationales for the correct number.
Yeah, I agree with that. Logistically, I don't think we can take the entire package and send it back.
Why?
because first of all, many departments have very realistic requests in front of us that are candidly a yawn, and they shouldn't be tied up in that. Number two, we have 10 weeks to close the warrant fundamentally. Okay, the annual town meeting is the first week of May. That means the warrants have to get shipped out the first week of April. That means they need to be closed fundamentally at the end of March. And we're in the middle of January, soon to be in the back half. So that to me, that means 10 weeks. And I think we need to give people guidance and also go back with a very targeted set of requests to thin out what's real and what's not. Someone has to make a decision on Harbor, right? It's not like it's not like they can cut it to 800, right? It's either going to happen this year or it's not. And the school study is a whole nother animal, but it too is binary, right? You pull those two out, and suddenly you're dealing with 4 million and a couple of really chunky things in here. I would go immediately to the biggest items and the biggest request list and really start weeding out what's absolutely necessary and what's not. But I just think if we send this back into the vapor with a generic, hey, we're just sending this back, and force the town to sort through it, we won't see it again for a month. And then, we're going to be just completely up against it in February. That's just my instinct. I just find it hard enough to get good answers on some of these requests when we start in January and work the whole time. I think if we lose a month, we'll just never get to the bottom of the IT request. That's just my thought based on past experience. But I hear your frustration, Michael. This is worthy of just sending back. I just think that ultimately the problem is going to land back in our laps after losing a month if we do that. But two different views of the same problem. I'm curious how other people feel.
I don't know what to think. Actually, my own view is these, under all normal circumstances, no one, certainly at the top level, starting with Chris himself, would submit numbers like these, realizing that in fact there's no way we would ever fund this level. So why should we have to deal with this?
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Michelle.
Michelle?
So in complete fairness, Chris and I were supposed to go through this last week. We didn't have the opportunity to do that. We're meeting tomorrow to pare this list down before you have to make those difficult decisions.
That's great.
We're sitting down with Jennifer Mullen, the finance director, and we're going to go through it item by item to see really what has validity for this year versus the next 9 years out. So hopefully that'll provide enough clarity and I can upload those items. But certainly if the school puts something forward, we put it forward.
I think if the school's going to put something forward, we can have that meeting immediately because I think it's going to be fairly straightforward to sort through.
I think it's a great idea, Michelle. That would help a lot. It would give us some top level guidance, which I prefer. I really would. Yeah.
Okay. And we're committed to getting that done tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. So hopefully that
Michelle?
narrows our list by the time we're actually out to liaison meetings.
Michelle, can you resend the link to the OneDrive, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so that sounds like a plan. So Michelle, I won't send anything out to anyone until you, Chris, and Jennifer Mullen have had a meeting, and hopefully, we have a little bit more clarity and hopefully a little bit more reality with regards to the requests in front of us. And then as soon as we have that, if you could let me know, or I'll follow up with you later this week. Even if we're dealing with a $4 million funnel, we still need to get the message out to the departments that they need to prepare for the reality that nothing's going to get funded. So we'll set the tone early. And then in liaison meetings, hopefully we can get people to, further narrow their lists or their requests. And I have some thoughts on that now, but I don't want to necessarily lead anybody. I think what I'd really, unless people want to talk about specific requests and perhaps, concerns they have around certain ones that caught their attention, which we can totally do today. The other thing we could do is just go straight to liaison assignments. But I guess I'd ask the committee what you'd prefer to do. I'm okay.
Right now, I don't want to end this discussion. I have a couple other points I want to raise.
Please.
All right, so if you feel we can't send this back, then I ask that you sit down with the select board member who is our liaison. I don't know who that might be, and with Chris Senior. Last summer, last fall, when we were meeting with the long-range planning group, Chris Senior acknowledged that the funding levels had been too low, and that he would see what he could do. And I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth. He would see what he could do to change his formula. So I have not seen what you folks are seeing yet, but if it looks like we're getting the same amount, then I would ask that we go back to Chris and say, please add more funds, take it out of the operating budget. And I would do that this week, if you're
Agreed.
concerned with the time frame.
Agreed. Michael, I've had that conversation with various select board members, not all, but some that I've found myself in other conversations with. We should probably reach out to advisory, who are going to have a view on this as well. And I think they're very much of the same mindset that, everyone recognizes that mechanically capital budget has been flat funded for 13 years and every other department has grown and the town revenue has grown at 4 to 4.5% a year. So everyone gets it. Whether or not people have the political will to actually step up and fix it, is going to determine how much stuff we're allowed to purchase this year. But yes, I will go to Chris tomorrow on this. Do you want to reach out to the folks at advisory? Would you like me to do that? I'm okay either way.
I can reach out to Rob Hillman and to Mike Barclay.
Okay, your point's spot on. Okay, so number one on our list, number one on our list is to repeat the request and the need for incremental funding, which is going to determine how much we can spend. Number two is to send the message that we will not be funding $7 million or anything even remotely close to it. We'll be funding what we receive. So whatever comes in is, and that's really it. So
we're overlooking one reason for sending this back.
Yeah.
In that we don't have accurate requests. So the choice is, shall we review the requests as submitted? Or do we send it back and say, update your requests so that we have an actual number to work with? And know that at this point, we have $2 million to support 7.6 million in requests. You have a chance to change.
Yeah.
And that those requests are due in 1 week. And Michelle, tell me if that's unrealistic, but if these requests have already been built into a document, I think saying that as a PDF and they can't change is kind of not a good excuse. You should be able to change them very easily and not say, oh, gee, they're PDFs and we can't change them.
No, sorry, Mike. I was saying I can't change them on their behalf. If facilities gives me an updated quote, I can't change them on their behalf. They would have to submit the change.
All right,
they're
well,
more
then
than capable of changing them.
All right, good. So,
Okay. It's an interesting idea, Michael. And that I think is perhaps a more graceful way of versus just sending the whole package back wholesale and saying, we're not doing this. And we're also not doing any work until you guys right size it. Asking people, sending the message that that, you know, these need updated and, you know, and a good number of them aren't going to get funded, you know, and asking them to update, I think is, I'm much more comfortable with that versus just sort of sending the message that we're going on strike.
Right, and I will convey this, these next steps, including the step that we are asking Michelle to obtain updated formal requests for all of us, advisory, capital budget, and select board.
Okay. Okay. So number one, we're going to Chris to, you know, to repeat the request for more money. Number two, we're basically going to send out an email to all the departments. I'm not going to send the request back. I'm just going to tell them flat out, you need to update your requests and do so knowing that, you know, we've got 7 million of requests and 2 million of funding as it stands right now. Okay. So those are two steps to be taken. You had mentioned you had a couple of thoughts, Michael. Were there?
No, we've covered them now.
Okay, perfect. Ralph, Francine, Susan, thoughts, suggestions?
Well, you know, I'm happy that that's happening. I think that works fine. I guess you have to go into a liaisons, but I was going to mention one thing is that, as I've mentioned to you before, that we need to actually see these committees and have them make presentations to us directly. I feel very strongly about that. And the scheduling of that is going to get very difficult, I think, going forward. So I'm only saying, if we do liaisons, I don't really particularly want to reach out to a particular department myself until they've made their presentation to us as a group. I want the whole group to actually see everything. And then if I'm a liaison to one or the other, I'd be glad to go out and get more detailed information, but I want to see that presentation and hear everyone's input first. I guess that's my view on this whole thing. So
So you'd like the liaison meeting to be more of a breakout working session to advance whatever was presented to the whole group, as opposed to try to help them craft it in advance. Is that okay?
Yeah.
It's an interesting approach. We've never done it that way before, but you know, look, there's always opportunity to try new things and do things better. I'm totally open to it. How do other people feel about that strategy?
Agreed.
Okay, Francine, Susan.
I like that approach.
Okay, let me make a so. Okay, so we're completely I think of like mind that this makes sense to give a try. What I'd like to suggest is that we therefore start with the stuff that's going to be most controversial and probably require the most explanation and the most follow-up work to actually resolve. You know, I don't, you know, I'd like to get those requests in as soon as possible so that everybody can hear them. We can identify the issues and we can start to, you know, start the process of that liaison role to rectify some of these things. Sorry, go on, please.
I was going to say, so are you suggesting that, for instance, like schools, because they do have the biggest ask, that we would go to them and say, okay, we're going to put you on the calendar for January or February. You need to be ready to present at that meeting.
Schools is certainly, you know, one of the few that's right at the top of the list.
Yeah.
You know, just it's more driven by the length of the list versus the complexity of some of the requests, but some of this stuff is going to be a lively discussion just based on the list. I can see it already. So
yeah. I was going to say, I was just thinking to your point early on about, you know, having them go back and, you know, each department go back and sort of narrow down their list or revise their list. You know, that may take some time. So we really need to push them to be ready and say, we're going to put you on the agenda for X date. You need to be ready, rather than them tell us when they're going to be ready, because they'll wait to the last minute.
Right. And we've seen this time and again, right? We cannot have this stuff. We cannot be on data seeking missions in the month of March, which I have vivid memories of at least two of those exercises working the phones from my daughter's spring break vacation somewhere far from here. So they just, people run the clock and assume that, we're just going to pass it if we don't get the information that we need. And I'd really like to get ahead of it.
That makes sense.
So, I look, without picking on anyone, I think, schools has a long list. And there are certain items on there that are going to require some real work to understand what they're really trying to solve for. For example, I'll just give an example, a $200,000 generator at the Osgood School to power the walk-in refrigerator, as the rationale. We could do that with a much smaller generator. So there's clearly something else going on there. There are other items on that list. The big one with the schools obviously is going to be the school study. And that's going to be binary. So yes, schools. The other one the other two that attract my attention very much are the roads request at $1 million. And that attracts my attention because first of all, it's a tripling of the of the spend rate that was put in place when this road program was done a few years back. Number one, and number two, we haven't spent the money that has already been appropriated to roads, right? I mean, we had a long debate last year whether or not we should even give them any more money because they had 3 years worth of road funds built up and no implementation. So I think there's a twofold discussion to be had there. Can they even spend more money if we give it to them? And secondly, what is the right run rate going forward? This is going to be another one of those cases where we have a third-party consultant that we paid for to tell us that we need to spend more money, which is, it's always a waste of money unto itself. We need to figure out what the real cost of roads is.
The irony of this whole thing too, I think, is that I think that there's going to be a sidewalk and roads committee formed.
Yeah.
Which will add their voice to the voices we've already heard about what needs to be done. So this one gets to be, listening to about 3 different voices, Brian's, their consultants, and now this committee. I mean, this is really quite an interesting question is, what do you do with all this input? Can't we get a simple answer here? So what exactly has to get done here? So.
Yeah, and look, we need to get them in and have the conversation, get to the bottom of it. My knee-jerk reaction is let's at least get back to steady state before we come up with a whole new plan. We're years behind on just paving roads, and let's spend the money that's been appropriated, and then let's figure out based on those road projects what it cost us to do a mile of road. And then figure out what it's going to cost us to do whatever amount of roads we should be doing each year going forward. But the consultant was just on a different planet in terms of versus the cost that we've actually incurred for our past road spend. It's just totally different numbers. And ours are real numbers. I mean, we paid, these projects were bid, we paid for them. We should know what it's actually costing us. And not just read this consultant report and break out the checkbook. So there's some work to be done around that number. The other thing is, keep in mind, everybody, roads were never part of capital budget until that road program was put in place. That was a DPW line item. Okay. It did not come through capital, and roads were dropped into capital so that they would be better managed, but no funding came with it. Okay. So, our funding's been flat for 13 years, and, someone dropped a $300,000 expense in without actually giving us the $300,000 to pay it, which is part of the reason there's so much pressure on the capital budget today. It gets back to this funding, this requirement for a funding increase. So roads is a big one. I think the other DPW stuff, it's just 2 more pieces of equipment. We have to make sure that, we understand what's coming and going in the fleet, whether or not it's really time. So those are more straightforward, but the roads are a big one. And then the IT request is a big one. we spent $500,000 on AT last year. There's another $500,000 request in front of us this year. We rolled out the entire IT department for less than $1 million. We ran the fiber loop through the entirety of the town. We bought all the devices. We rolled out 2 data centers. We rolled out the entire, switching network, both wired and wireless, for less than $1 million. And we did that in anticipation of roughly the same population and use pattern that we have in town today. So I'm not, I just think we really need to make sure we understand, what's driving the need for all this equipment. And maybe it's real, but I think it's still on us to understand how we're getting to these numbers, because I think between the network and the data center, we might have spent $400,000 on the first installment, and now on the refresh, we're spending $1 million. It just seems like a really, really big, it's a quantum leap. So anyway, we got some work to do on that. Those are the 3, big ones that we should get in right away. I don't know how people feel about those, or if there's anything else that people feel should be the first 3 priorities, but I'd be curious.
Those are good for me. Sure.
Okay.
I agree.
And in fairness, I haven't seen the facilities list. I don't know if anyone has been through the facilities list and saw items on facilities that were controversial that would, put them in that top group or make it a close 4th or whatever. But I feel like the police and fire requests were much more straightforward.
Have you not seen facilities, Brian?
Sorry?
What we've got is, the big one looks like retile the classrooms by facilities. And then we've got another 200,000 for the generator for Joseph Osgood School. So, and then
Okay.
there's 70,000 here for public safety standby generator replacement. And then there's another 250,000. That might be last year's, for instance.
Yeah, the 70,000 was approved.
That's what I
the
thought.
70,000 was last year.
That's right. It's showing up in this year. But anyway,
And wasn't the Beechwood playground something that
I thought that,
opted not to?
I thought that
I
capital,
thought we funded repairs and not on its back.
Correct.
Well, we funded the repairs. Is it back on the list?
So
Well, here again,
yeah,
what we're looking at is a
250,000.
spreadsheet with no detail. And what
Yeah.
we need are requests that have all of the has a complete list of what's being requested and the rationale for each line item.
Yeah,
So,
that's a perpetual battle, but I hear what you're
Shouldn't
saying.
be, Brian, I'm of the mind that it should not be a battle. It should be a simple statement now, right at the beginning, that without these items, we will vote not to approve. Or certainly one member will vote not to approve without
Right.
these items.
Okay, look, I can pass that message along. It's worth a try, Michael. It's worth a try.
Thanks.
And I will not parse my words when I do it. You can be assured of that.
Right. Does everyone agree, or am I?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Okay. So that will be part of the message that we're asking all departments to update the requests, make sure their numbers are accurate and provide clear expectations. Otherwise, they should expect people to not vote for them. Okay. So it's interesting. Back to the facilities items. A lot of these are actually, showing up in the schools list. So it's possible that I've seen many of these, but I will go see if there are others.
What that means though, I think though, Brian, sorry to interrupt, but so I think that means there's duplication in that 7.6 million.
I need to go look at that. it's possible that they only appear once on the spreadsheet, and so maybe there's not duplication, but we need to sort through it, and I will go look more closely at that. Okay. Okay, so the next step is we've got to get schools, DPW and IT, in as soon as possible. Okay.
I would also add harbor master.
Well, Michelle said that's still up in the air, right? So I think until they determine whether it's this year.
I believe that that's being driven by the harbor committee.
I agree. I don't think it's Lori at all, and probably not the right person.
Right, but Lori is the funnel for that.
Yeah.
So, the Parker Ave ramp project is under Lori, for example.
Okay.
And, you raise a very interesting question, though, I think, Mike, in that although it comes under Lori, the proponent is not Lori, as it turns
Correct.
out.
Correct.
So it's in a way, what we want to hear is we'd be delighted to hear from Lori, but we'd rather hear from the proponent as well. I think the person who feels ownership for something should certainly be in the same room as the person who receives the information. So
Right.
that puts an awful load on Tim Davis. I know that, but nevertheless, I think he's the big proponent. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking about I was feeling the exact same issue, but from the inverse perspective, it may be unfair to put that big load on Lori, was my point. Because she's going to come in, we're going to give the project a grilling, and I'm not really sure that she's the one that's done the work to answer the questions, which puts her in it's just an unfair position to put her in.
And she may not be the proponent, which is interesting.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. Hopefully tomorrow we have a better perspective on whether or not that's coming, and then we can decide when to bring that one in. But certainly schools, DPW, IT, got to get them in immediately. So I'll reach out to those departments tomorrow and ask them to start coming in as early as next week.
And would you add facilities to DPW?
I wouldn't add it to DPW because I don't really think of them as the same department, but
No, they're not. I'm just saying they've got several generators that we're questioning. Therefore, we should also have facilities.
Yeah, we should get facilities in, I guess. Look, they're all coming. I guess that would be close behind the other three with regards to urgency. I think those are easier requests for us to understand, if that makes sense. At least for me, if someone asks for a generator, I can ask them, why, and I can understand that fairly quickly. Understanding, how much we really need to spend each year on roads just feels to me like a whole lot more work. So I'd like to get that stuff started earlier, unless people feel differently. But yeah, facilities would come right behind these really tricky ones, unless folks feel differently.
You're right. Yeah, I agree.
Sure.
Okay, I just want to go right at the hardest stuff so that we've got the maximum amount of time to deal with it. And make sure that no one sort of tries to run the clock on us. And I think, Michael, also a lot of the facility stuff is going to get covered in the schools discussion, which is going to be right up front. The Osgood generator, the tiling of the classrooms, a lot of that stuff is facilities, but it's also on the schools list. So
right. So let me just offer this suggestion, and that is when you tell Chris that we are looking for face-to-face meeting with the proponents, we want to make sure there's a representative with firsthand knowledge of the need and rationale, that it's not going through someone else. So it's not Lori trying to explain what the Harbor Committee wants, or Michelle trying to explain what the Harbor Committee wants.
That's a good point.
yeah, that's a very good point. Okay.
So is there anything with Town Hall that will be coming up in May?
I think the expectation by many people at this moment is yes, but I don't think that's been 100%
Okay.
resolved.
So what we've laid out are our next steps for really the first phase of our 10-week run. And that town hall will probably come in the second phase, hopefully.
You know, or as quickly as people decide what's going to happen there. I mean, Mark Cameron is online. We can ask him to give, just a quick update on town hall if you want just a really brief summary.
We don't have to put him on the spot.
I didn't ask him to
unless he's
prepare, so maybe-
comfortable, but no, I'm not making that statement to find out. I just
Okay.
want to make sure we don't lose that item on our important list.
Yeah,
On the ones that are not yawns,
yep.
right?
That is definitely not a yawn, and
Yeah.
the $2 million study at the school is not a yawn. I hear you. It's not a yawn.
Yeah,
It's an interesting point. Maybe that might even jump some of these if in fact they decide they're going for it.
right. Now, Russ Benetti is my neighbor, and we'll pass each other on the street and, gossip. But he mentioned that town hall is, well, this is a week or two ago, so maybe it's changed. Town hall is coming before community preservation on the 27th, I believe. So that suggests to me that there may be a process in place, a process rolling forward right now to begin to get funding in place. So I'm reading between the lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an expectation by many people that it's coming this spring.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me that that's happening. Mark Cameron texted me, he said he can give us a brief update if you want.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
again,
I don't think that's not appropriate tonight. I don't think
not
so.
appropriate tonight.
I don't
Okay.
think so. We
Yeah,
ought to just
okay,
stick with our schedule. That's
All right.
Okay.
Liaisons,
you're off
let's
the
get
hook.
on with that.
Okay.
Okay. But I think the net summary, and Michael, thank you for bringing this up. I think the net summary is everyone should assume that there are, there are many people in town government that believe that is or may be coming at this annual town meeting. I don't know if it's registered on people yet that the warrant closes in 10 weeks. So, there's a distinct possibility that not only comes, but it comes and there's an attempt to throttle it through, frankly. Because 10 weeks is not a lot of time to work the process on a project of that magnitude.
I have another suggestion for
Yeah.
our 10-week timeline. I would like to have Jennifer Mullen appear on a joint committee session with advisory and us, and select board are invited to listen, but this would be our meeting. And we would like their report on the town's ability to fund debt exclusion projects at different tranches, at different levels. So 10 million, 15, 20, 25, 30.
You just want to know what that debt service looks like. Is that my
Mhm.
understanding?
Right. How much capacity do we have, and what effect will that have on our operating budget when it comes to debt service?
Are you talking excluded or are you talking in levy debt?
Well,
Because if it's
I'm not
excluded,
being specific because I really don't feel comfortable making a statement for one or the other. I just want to know how much can the town afford to spend with whatever mechanism is in place or offered. So I'll just say, for whatever mechanism the town could use, how much can the town afford? And what will that additional tax cost the taxpayer at those different levels? And one other variable would be the number of years. So whether it's 20 or 30 or 40.
Right.
So let's get that nailed down. And I hope that we don't get shuffled off to, well, the long range planning committee is taking care of that. I don't find that an acceptable answer because we are a bylaw committee,
Yep.
as is advisory, and this is our responsibility to know this information.
I agree with that.
On request.
Yep.
Does everyone agree?
Oh, of course, right.
Yeah, okay.
We need
Yeah.
a schedule. That's what we need, right? I think
Yeah.
the big question is going to be, Mike, what can the town afford and what has to be in an override? Basically, that's the question.
Okay.
So if the town has, what's its capacity for actually funding whatever it wants to actually bond?
Well, but see, I don't want to get into a big debate, but to me, debt exclusion is still a tax increase.
Agreed.
It is, of course.
No question.
So there's debt exclusion, there's override, and both are tax increases.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
The reason I was asking the question is and just, this is just a crude response, okay? I mean, we don't have any capacity in levy, okay? Because whatever we put in levy eats into our future capital appropriation, and our current capital appropriation doesn't cover our current capital spending requirement.
Good point.
So we don't need them to do any analysis. The answer is zero, okay? From my perspective in levy. The rest of it's just a shell game and an extend and pretend, but fundamentally the answer is zero if you do it in levy. So anything that people want to bond really in any meaningful way, other than maybe just covering a timing issue 1 year to the next, is basically an override or a debt exclusion, and it's an incremental tax on somebody one way or another, and on one hand, the capacity for that is unlimited. On the other hand, at some point, the taxpayer is going to say no, right? So I don't know. It's somewhat of an open-ended question, but look. This is a full conversation our committee should have.
Mhm.
I mean, that's half a meeting, and we should do it. We should absolutely do it.
And now is the time. Let's do it up front.
Yeah.
So
Because
we're armed with all good information as we consider all of
and I
these
agree we
points.
should do it in part because we're going to get pressured to take on some. I guarantee you, somebody's going to say, "Well, just take on $500,000 of debt," right? Every $1 million that you spend in debt, ultimately you're going to spend another $1 million in interest, and that's $1 million that you couldn't spend on an asset because you spent it on interest. It is a fool's errand. So we might as well have the conversation because we are going to get to the end of this and somebody's going to pressure us to take on some debt to fund a project that, they feel has to be done this year. Okay. So I think those are, I think we've got our next steps. Number one, go to Chris and repeat the request and need for more money. Number two, ask all the departments to update the requests and provide clear explanations. And without them, they should expect, no votes or votes no. Number three, we got to get the schools, DPW, IT, and then, and then probably town hall in to address those, as soon as possible and get the liaison process started. And we're going to ask for firsthand, proponents with firsthand knowledge to present, not representatives. And, then we're going to have Jennifer in and maybe do a joint meeting between capital and advisory to talk about debt service philosophically and mechanically.
Right. Good.
So that's my 4 takeaways from this meeting. Is that
Sounds good.
anything else?
No, it's good. That's solid.
Okay. It's a thoughtful starting point. Shall we talk about liaisons? Or do we have more items people want to cover before we do that? Okay. let's just start at the top of the list. We've got schools. In the past, it's been me and Francine. I don't, you know, I don't have a view. Does anyone have an interest in doing schools? I guess I'd start with that.
I'd like to stick with schools.
Okay.
I certainly have an interest, but I have several other big departments that I'm covering.
Okay. So one thing that I would like to do, and I don't necessarily want to drop schools, but I definitely want to be in the liaison discussion on IT. I didn't get to an understanding of what we did last year, which leaves me feeling very uncomfortable, and having reviewed, you know, the next requests, I'm sort of starting right where I left off. So I don't know if anyone wants schools. I can do schools and IT. We're all going to end up doing more than one department, but before I jump on schools, I want to make sure would anyone like schools?
Well, I mean, I've had library and rec and other affairs in the past, and none of them have any requests right now, so I'd be happy to join Francine.
I didn't catch what you said, Susan.
I'm not on mute, am I? I said that I have traditionally had library and rec and elder affairs, and they don't have anything listed right now, so I could join Francine on schools.
That sounds good.
Okay, sounds great. And I've got a bunch of years of experience on that one and lots of history to, if you guys run up against anything that seems odd.
Let me also add here, Brian.
Yeah.
Ted Carr is on the school committee, and Ted has in the past been part of advisory. And I think we should make a considered effort to meet with Ted on a regular basis, perhaps one-on-one, outside of a full school committee meeting.
Yeah.
To just maintain a good relationship with someone who I think gets it when it comes to financing, or when it comes to fiscal management for the town as a whole.
It's a great suggestion. I don't want to suggest that, you know, that he's the only one that has that capability, but certainly he has more connectivity than perhaps, you know, other members on that committee, both to advisory and, you know, he's a select board member. And your point's spot on, Michael. I think that's a great suggestion. I think if it's one thing that we could be doing a lot better, it's just having better connectivity, you know, with the school in particular, as they go about their financial planning. It feels somewhat disconnected right now, at least versus, you know, past years, I guess I'd say.
Okay.
Okay, so so schools is going to be Francine and Susan, and then DPW.
That is a group that I work with closely, and I'm happy to continue.
Okay.
And that would also include facilities.
Okay. Okay. Do we, does anyone want to be a second on DPW or facilities?
I could probably do that, Brian.
Okay, you want to do both of those?
Sure.
Ralph?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so Ralph, I'll just include you when I email Brian and Nick.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, and then, you know, IT, I would definitely like to revisit this. I wonder if, you know, who else would like to do it?
I was doing it with you last year.
Okay. Sounds great. Want to do it again?
Sure.
Okay.
And this past year, the I don't think there was a lot of spending, because the big spending was the year before, if memory serves, in upgrading the network. Or was that spent this year?
It was this year.
It was this
It
year.
was
So
2023. Yeah.
Right.
It was the past ATM.
Right, so that brought everything, brought our networks up to a higher level of security
And capacity.
and
Yeah.
capacity.
Capacity. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A lot of new switches.
Yep,
Okay. So, that's Michael and I. And then we've got, and that leaves police and fire.
I can help out with either of those.
Sorry, Susan, your mic is really,
Oh, sorry. I said I can help out with either one of those.
okay.
I can as well.
Are the two of you okay doing both of them? Or you want to do just one or the other, and we, someone else can pick up on one of the others? I'm happy to have you do both, honestly. They seem pretty straightforward this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Susan. I'm fine doing both because I don't think there's
Okay.
anything controversial.
famous last words. I noticed in that 10-year spreadsheet that they've got the new facility in there, I think for 2025.
Right.
So now would be the time to start discussions on that.
It's a very good point. It's always seems to be a placeholder that slips out, 1 year at a time, but it's always, just beyond the horizon. So that's
Right.
probably one of the first questions. Okay.
There
And
might be some grant monies out there, that's all I can say. I don't know how we fund these things.
Say that again.
These types of things.
I can't hear you.
yeah, Susan, we've got to get the hairball out of the microphone on your computer.
I don't know.
We're not hearing you.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
just. So that leaves Harbor, which may or may not have a request. If anyone wants to be liaison there, does anyone want that one, first of all, specifically? Otherwise I can just reach out to Tim and or Lori and find out what's going on. And we'll probably have a better answer tomorrow anyway.
I very much would like to.
I
You'd
can
like
do-
to, Michael. Okay.
I can do Harbor with you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Perfect.
So, Brian, once you've had a chance to convey through Chris that we want to hear from the Harbor Committee versus the Harbor Master on any requests for
Yep.
Government Island, or from Chris himself, then I can reach out to whoever is going to be that point person. And I shouldn't say I can, it'll be Ralph and I will reach out to the point person.
Okay. Okay. I think that's it. So for schools, we've got Francine. and
Oh.
Susan. Sorry?
The whole notion of fields and sidewalks, is that
Yes.
going to be facilities? Is that going to be DPW? Is that going to be select board? Where will that come from?
That's a really good question. There hasn't been a clear sponsor in the past. Michelle's been sort of on the hook for it, and Michelle's not, not really a department. So, and it's probably not, probably not fair to her, frankly, to have to lead it. I mean, someone has to own it. Did I miss anything? I mean, do we have requests in here for fields this year?
See them. No,
You see them?
I did not see them. No.
Nor did I. So
No.
it's a good question, Michael.
It's in the noise somewhere it's in the background somewhere for sure.
Yeah.
It just seemed like as we're going into special town meeting,
Yep.
there was a lot of push
Mhm.
for fields improvements, new courts and so forth, that would come up at annual town meeting.
You know, recreation hasn't submitted, Mike, and that may well be it's going to come in under recreation, and they have
Right.
not submitted anything. That's right. That could be another very big issue, right?
If, you know, if we don't have the request now, there's just no realistic way to do this at ATM. I mean, I don't know how other people feel about this, but I mean, this warrant closes in 10 weeks. And these requests were supposed to be in, you know, basically last September. So.
And don't you think that we're going to get that request?
We
Because-
may, and I think, you know, I think that we collectively need to, and individually need to think about how we're going to respond to that. I don't feel any obligation to be on the receiving end of that kind of a jammed exercise.
I can foresee though, Brian, that Jack Creighton is going to come to Chris Senior and say, put in X million for the fields. Because the select board had made that one of their key goals, was fields. So it's really possible, if not highly likely, that we're going to get something.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. Sounds like I need to have a call with Jack.
Yeah.
And let him know if something's coming, it needs to come with a check attached.
Right, yeah.
Because
A
we don't have
generous
it.
donation, yeah.
It's, you know, it's nice to dream about all this stuff, but paying for it's another matter.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think that with the exception of some of these nebulous things like fields and sidewalks, we've got liaisons on everything. So what I have, just repeated back, for schools, I've got Francine and Susan. For DPW, I've got Michael and Ralph. For IT, I've got Brian and Michael. For police, it's Susan and Francine. For fire, it's the same, Susan and Francine. For facilities, it's Michael and Ralph. And for harbor, it's Michael and Ralph.
And then I also attend the water commission meetings regularly.
Yeah, which actually, as I read this aloud, leaves me as a very visible slacker with just IT.
But you're also the chair and making sure that we get our meeting scheduled and our agenda set. So
Yeah,
it's not a bad thing.
well, if people are comfortable with that, that's fine. If people want to lighten their load, and, you know, I'm happy to pick up an additional assignment. It was not my intent to go down this list and dump it all off.
Yeah.
So,
We don't have anybody
The one
connected
thing-
to sewer, but
The one
So-
thing I would love to have is the fifth member, rather than me being the fifth member, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, I just hate to start this year again with a shortened crew. I really do. So.
so there have been several conversations. There's not a clear answer to this yet, Ralph. But, you know, some of the names that have been bantied about are not ready. And, you know, and others who are ready, willing, and able, you know, could be delicate, just given, you know, other projects that may be coming this cycle. And their involvement therein, which, you know, could be a little bit ticklish, just depending on what comes and when. So I don't want to sort of throw out names publicly in this meeting, but we're, you know, it's a discussion. It's a series of discussions that's taking place. And if anyone has any candidates that they think would be a good fit, please, you know, put them forward. Just call me. I'll call them the same day.
right. I've reached out to two people that I know. One has turned me down. The other person has not responded. But where I'm going is to find someone who might might be a long-time resident of the town. Perhaps has had children go through the schools,
Yeah.
Aware of all of the different initiatives and accomplishments that the town has made. And someone who cares about how their money's being spent. So not looking for any particular expertise, but more about being a long-time member of the community. And so that's how I've oriented myself.
Sorry, I agree with you, everything you said.
How does that sound to the rest of you? Do you have any other suggestions for the kind of person we're looking for?
I think your criteria are good, Mike. They really are. So that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's hard to find that combo. So, but I keep.
You almost, unfortunately, I think in those terms that we're probably talking about recycling somebody who's had past involvement and therefore feels knowledgeable about these subjects. And so unfortunately, we're going to recycle people. I wish there were people we could introduce newly to this whole thing. I understand how difficult that is.
Right. I'm going to reach out to Glenn Pratt. He moves
Great idea.
different circles, including, historical society as well as town hall.
Yeah. And, and his son is doing, a really thoughtful job.
Tremendous. He's
over
really
the water department.
good water commissioner.
Right. And my guess is, that Chris has friends in town.
Right.
And he probably has friends in town that grew up in.
I will call Chris as well. We
We
developed a nice working relationship on the water commission meeting.
very, very impressed by him. If there's anyone, if he knows anybody that's,
Right.
exercises even a fraction of the judgment that he demonstrates, it'd be.
Right.
It'd be
So
helpful.
to answer your question, Ralph, we, in speaking with Brian one-on-one, we both recognize the urgency, and we're trying to come up with a good person to get it going.
Thanks.
All right. I don't think I have anything else. So I just open it to see if anyone else has anything else. If anyone else has anything else that we'd like to cover before we adjourn. I think really the only question I have is, next meeting. I don't know. I mean, if we have a department ready for next week and, their schedule may dictate availability. So I guess my first question would be, what is the availability of folks to meet next week on various different days, depending on if a department is ready. And I'd also, just disclose, there's a strong probability I'm going to be traveling Monday, possibly even on a plane. You as a team are more than welcome to proceed forward on Monday if that's the best day for everybody and there's somebody ready to come in front of us, or we could do later in the week. But I just put the question out there, what people's willingness and availability is to meet different days next week.
I'm available.
Okay.
I'm traveling Thursday next week, so I can't participate, but otherwise available.
On Thursday. Okay. And Ralph, how's your week?
Thursday's not good for me.
Yeah. Monday and Tuesday are fine. I don't think we should do it without you, to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay.
So, but Tuesday would be fine with me. Wednesday would work fine, well too. So.
So Francine, you said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but not Thursday.
That's right.
Okay. And I can do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Okay. And Susan.
I think Susan said Thursday she couldn't either. I think that's what I heard.
Okay. So we'd be trying to do, if the consensus is that you'd like me there, and it would be Tuesday or Wednesday. It sounds like that's the consensus.
Okay.
Does that work?
Works. Yep.
Okay, let me see if I can't get a department in.
Is there a select board meeting next Tuesday?
There is, Michelle mentioned it started at 7. You know, we can either go, you know, parallel path to select board, or we can go before on Tuesday, or we could just shoot for Wednesday.
I think shoot for Wednesday, and at this time of year, I like to listen into those select board meetings and get
You
a
do,
feel for
so
what's
you have
going
a
on.
preference for Wednesday, is that what I'm hearing?
That's my preference for that
Okay.
reason.
Okay, and Francine, I know you work you work a day job. I assume that you don't free up until about 7 o'clock. Is that right?
My schedule's a little bit better now. So
Okay.
I can meet after 5 typically.
You could actually meet in person at 5. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that gives us some flexibility. So we could either go 5 to 7 Tuesday, or pretty much any time on Wednesday.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
Just trying to understand what the range of possibilities is. That might even be preferable to the schools, for example, to do it earlier. Okay. And let me see what I can get in terms of a department, and we'll also have Michelle come in and just give us an update on projects that we've already appropriated for
Yes.
in the last cycle.
Right.
And we may be able to get some update on what our current funding levels are going into this cycle. It'll give us some idea at least. All right.
Good deal.
I think that's it. Tuesdays and Wednesdays fine. Okay, so that's next week, and we'll deal with the rest of the calendar after that. But I think generally speaking, we'll be shooting for Mondays, and we'll probably be meeting almost every week
Okay.
throughout, you know, for the next 10 weeks. Okay.
Right.
All right.
In April, I'll be traveling, but we should be done by then.
We should.
Okay.
I certainly hope we're done, and I
Right.
hope we not only to have the items in the warrant, but we have votes next to all of them, which is the right way to do this.
Right.
That's the goal.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any other business or items to cover, or shall we adjourn?
I think we can adjourn.
Okay. Happy to entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. All in favor, roll call vote. Brian Host, aye. Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Susan Franklin,
Aye.
Francine Lyons,
Aye.
Ralph Dormitzer.
Aye.
Okay.
It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Have a great night. The time is 8:16.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.